Hey, can y'all quiet down? Seriously, quiet down and calm down. Use your inside voices if you use them at all. Shh. You should not be talking. And you, sit up straight in your chair, and all of you, most importantly, sit silently. Observe, listen, and learn. The perfect student, under control as all things should be. Remain this way. Learn and enjoy the opportunities and knowledge given in this place. I expect nothing but perfection from all of you. Now, if you need proof of success or motivation, just look at our hardworking, intelligent, competent Asian immigrants and their descendants. You know, Time magazine had a whole article for them, for those Asian American whiz kids back in 1987. Model minority certainly has a tune to it, does it not? Let's take that catchy alliteration one step further. Model, minority, myth. Maybe that's also a phrase worth thinking about. Now, this aforementioned myth is based on stereotypes. Stereotypes of Asian American children being mathematical whiz kids, of tiger moms forcing their children to do more and be better, of nerdy, effeminate fathers who hold prestigious but not leadership positions in STEM industries. The model minority myth characterizes Asians and Asian Americans as polite, rule-abiding members of society who've achieved the American dream through their discipline and their hard work. Sounds like a good stereotype, right? I beg to differ. Recognizing the fact that there is no such thing as a good stereotype requires a critical analysis of the model minority myth through time, beginning with the initial arrival of Asian immigrants into the United States, moving on to the way it manifests in the modern day, and finally, pondering the implications it has for diversifying immigrant populations in the future. Now, a myth about a demographic as large as Asian Americans over a country as expansive as the United States doesn't just appear overnight. Luckily, we have Ellen Wu, assistant professor at Indiana University Bloomington, to shed some light on how this myth first began to develop. Now, the United States first began seeing its Asian immigrants in around the 1850s, mainly Chinese ones. Now, despite the potential that these immigrants presented and later fulfilled, they were met only with racism and xenophobia, perceived as sleazy perverts and gamblers. The United States government would be quick to pass formal quotas and exclusion acts to limit this population's success in the United States. However, the outbreak of World War II presented two new needs for the United States government to achieve. First, the fact that it needed to appear as a liberty-focused, egalitarian democracy that's fighting a totalitarian axis, and second, the need to preserve the potential of an alliance with China as they fought Japan in the Pacific theater of the war. Quickly, we would see that yellow peril was reversed, racist policies were repealed, and active propaganda efforts were begun to make Chinese families seem much more approachable, much more acceptable for American society. Keep in mind that none of this was done in the interest of protecting a population that was oppressed by the United States, but rather protecting the reputation of a country that needed to preserve some alliances. Now, journalists and propaganda efforts would run with these efforts going into the Cold War, making Chinese families the face of nuclear family values as well as anti-communist efforts, citing them as examples of disciplined young children and as proof that capitalism brings prosperity. Now, the actual term model minority doesn't appear until a little later in 1966 in an article by sociologist William Peterson, an article written for the New York Times titled "Success Story, Japanese American Style." This article would laud Japanese Americans for overcoming racism in the United States to become paragons of perseverance and success, and would also create the stereotyping framework in which Asian Americans were perceived as economically useful. After all, acceptance can only come after utility is proved. Now, the racist obstacles that Peterson mentions in his article were, in reality, government-sanctioned removals of constitutional rights of American citizens who had Japanese ancestry on the vague basis of espionage. Notably, German and Italian people were not targeted by these efforts. Release from inhumane internment camps and relocation to other areas of the country to normal communities would rest on the Americanization of a Japanese person, of categorizations of white, brown, and black based on their behavior. And as history tends to do, history would repeat itself. These propaganda efforts were again switched around as Japanese Americans began to volunteer and participate in the war effort to prove their patriotism and to fight these racist stereotypes. In fact, the 442nd Regiment, dominated by Nisei, second-generation Japanese immigrants, would go on to become the most decorated military regiment of the United States to this day. As Dr. Nicholas Hartlip explains, any minority could have been the model minority. East Asian immigrants simply fell victim to the standards imposed on them. They're perceived as excellent, as hardworking, because they were forced to be. That was the only way to survive and succeed. And unfortunately, after being forced into that box, Asian Americans remain stuck in that box today. Alison Reichel-Loder of Concordia University tells us how by perceiving all Asians as overachieving, successful people, it eliminates and erases the individual diversity and achievement and accomplishment of every Asian American person. It also silences racism that occurs against Asian people on the grounds of racism. There is a disproportionate lack in academic and mental health support offered to Asian Americans. Think A for average, B for bad. You're Asian, so don't you have some sort of computer chip in your brain that gives you access to primordial calculus knowledge? Trust me, there isn't one, because if there was one, my pre-calculus grade would not be what it is right now. Now, even if that microchip in my brain isn't working that well, there are other things that people consider to work very well, such as the Asian employee. In fact, Asians work so well that white-collar Asian professionals are the least likely to be promoted to management positions despite their experience and accolades. In the words of Buck Gee, an Ascend executive advisor, we're seen as great workers, but not great leaders. And the effects of these forever foreigner stereotypes are seen in the economic outcomes of Asian Americans as well. Despite having some of the highest educational rates and median incomes in the country, 12 out of 19 Asian member descent groups are on the lowest rungs of the poverty ladder in this country, having poverty rates at or higher than the national average. We haven't even touched on the way that immigrants must navigate hostile foreign bureaucracies, or the difficulties of second languages, or how there is a college tax for Asians when they apply, where they are held at consistently higher bars to gain acceptance than other counterparts. For example, if Navya Singh and, let's say, Nancy Smith are applying to their dream college and have comparable applications, Navya Singh has to earn 100 points more on her SAT to gain acceptance. All of this culminates into an internalization of biases, an uncomfortable feeling in calling out racism, a hyper-awareness of perceived success and fulfillment, and a feeling that you must always be well-behaved, even submissive to authority, even when being wronged. Despite this myriad of disparities that we see plaguing Asian communities today, policymakers continue to leave these issues unaddressed. Instead, Asians are invoked as an example of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps in a meritocratic America, where if you try hard enough, you too can be successful. When in reality, that excellence is something that was forced upon Asian communities. And actually, the model minority myth becomes a point of comparison between different minority and ethnic groups. After all, if Asians can do it, why can't Black communities, Hispanic communities? Instead of creating actionable solutions, the model minority myth sows discord between and within groups that should recognize that they are all exploited by these unfair standards imposed on them. However, this need to become more united, more together, to address such issues is only poised to become more treacherous in the years to come, as immigration rates increase, as we see diversity take its peak in the United States of America. In fact, the 2020 US Census reported that we had a 6.2% increase in diversity from 2010 to 2020. Now, it may seem like a small number after all. 6 is just a single-digit number, but the sheer volume of diversity that we're going to be experiencing in America as we look into the future is insurmountable. Latino, Asian, and Black groups are making up the main engines of this nation's growth and are likely to do the same going forward. That 6.2% is only poised to increase. It reflects the changing demographic needs of our nation. No longer are we living in an era of white baby boomers, but rather an era defined by, for a lack of a better word, salad of ethnicities and races. We are living in an era where anyone can become the next model minority. As Viet Thanh Nguyen tells us in an incredibly reflective article for Times Magazine, people find it easier to blame a foreign country or a minority for challenges they face in their day-to-day life. To acknowledge the reality that it is policymakers signing or not signing legislation into action, or that it is corporations seeking to protect their own profits that are the ones behind the challenges and difficulties we face, is a reality that Americans are not comfortable with. Instead, we resort to blaming the unfamiliar. That unfamiliar was once Chinese immigrants, then it was Japanese ones. Indians are gaining increasing prominence in American society, Mexicans as well. South American immigrants, such as those from Venezuela, are also on the rise. Possible victims of this kind of manipulation, people that are going to be forced into boxes and never allowed to defy those standards, possible victims never stop coming. Having addressed and discussed the past and present of the model minority myth, we are now better equipped to address it in the future. Now is the time to reject the silence that is plaguing Asian communities in the United States today, because Asian or not, the model minority myth affects you. The standards it imposes, the paradigms it's created, they reach and touch all aspects of life. Rather than allowing diversity to divide us, it should allow us to thrive. There's no need to not recognize the fact that we are all individual, diverse people coming from different cultures, but it's time that we realize that coming from a different country, that having a hard to pronounce last name is not an indicator of your GPA. Now is the time to create platforms to celebrate our differences, as well as recognize the fact that, yes, Asians too can experience racism and also are not limited by the box you put them into. Rather than becoming a model minority, it is time that we become model citizens, because the transformative impact that this initiative can become a gateway to, of not forcing people to become whiz kids or tiger moms or holding STEM positions, with this recognition and rejection, we can work together to make a more united society a reality rather than a myth. Thank you.